What's up, everybody, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. This is Shelf Appeal, the weekly show where I go over the books that I picked up at the comic book shop this week. I give you a little bit of a summary as to what they're all about, and whether there's something you should go back to the comic book shop for. To start off with, we're going to go with a book that I haven't really been picking up on the regular, but that is Captain America Steve Rogers number 7. So with Civil War II coming to a close, I was really anticipating a little bit more of a spoilery kind of conclusion to that particular part of this tie-in. But what I found was a pleasant surprise. Ultimately, Civil War II was nowhere to be found, and we immediately dove back into the Hail Hydra storyline, and we've got some very interesting developments, because Steve Rogers, because he's Captain America, he's very vigilant, he's got these very intrinsic and, inset beliefs, and because he's got this strength of belief, what does he want to do? He wants to make things the best. He wants to make America the best, and he wants to make Hydra the best. And what is the thing holding Hydra back? The Red Skull. So this is going to be an interesting take on him taking down the Red Skull, and they see the real plan go into motion. Of course, since the Red Skull still has the brain of Charles Xavier stuck up in his big red melon, he's going to need some help, and who more than his most trusted friend from his youth, Baron Zemo. That's something that I didn't necessarily see coming, so I'm really excited about where this arc's going to go, and I'm going to definitely have to start picking up Steve Rogers' Captain America a lot more often, simply to keep up with this storyline, which seems like it's going to be a really good one. And then as we finish up with Steve Rogers, we're going to go to Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps number 8. So after the conclusion of the last Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps issue number 7, we saw the absolute destruction of Hal Jordan, the destruction of Sinestro, Warworld is in pieces, and what is really developing here? To be honest with you, it's not a whole heck of a lot. We see some alliances that are formed between the Yellow Lantern Corps and the Green Lantern Corps, reluctantly, and then ultimately what it comes down to is that there's a brand new player in the villain game that's going to be impacting these things because they've set a trap that was really easy for people to fall into. So it's a book that, it's been fun up to now, but I'm not necessarily sure what direction it's going, so I'm going to have to take a wait-and-see approach on this one. And then we hop into a book that I had to wait a while for, and that is Betty and Veronica number 2. So Betty and Veronica number 2 picks up at the whole confrontational situation where Pop's Diner is going to be taken over by a coffee chain that is owned by Veronica's dad. Yeah, there's not really a whole heck of a lot going on in this particular book. The art style is very cool. Adam Hughes, I really like what he does with his, his palette. His colors are very good. I'm really a fan of his work. But man, there's just not necessarily enough in this book. There's a few really cool, funny moments. But, it's just like, okay, man, Ronnie is just being a total bitch to Betty, and you don't really know why. I'm sure there's some sort of motivation, but this isn't quite enough to keep me sticking around. If it comes back out on the schedule, I'll probably pick up the next one, but if it's not here next month, then I don't really see myself grabbing Betty and Veronica again. However, there is a book that I'm going to continue to pick up, and that is Green Valley. So Green Valley number 2 is after the issue number 1, where we are introduced to the Knights of Caledonia and their great deeds. Essentially they take on all this barbarian horde. They go back into the city and stuff like that, which is ultimately ravaged. And immediately what Max Landis does in this book is just time jumps. He gives us, 1 year of people just being depressed and distraught and just sticking around the same burnt-out husk of a town. And ultimately, there's contemplations of suicide and desertion, and these guys are just not on the best of terms because they've been watching one of their friends, deep in depression, kind of just let himself go and not care about things. They've just been kind of stuck there. This is a really interesting take because ultimately these guys are kind of despondent. They don't really believe in magic. There's no such thing as dragons. And then this kid shows up and tells them that all of those things are attacking his local area. And they finally bring him to Green Valley, and it's very interesting, kind of deep-seated green foresty valley with a town, and I'm really interested to see where this really goes. There wasn't a whole heck of a lot of story elements. It was mostly establishing different character pieces, different relationships and where they're at in those aspects. And hopefully we're going to get a lot more into the actual plot and meat and potatoes of this 9-book arc next time that we get into Green Valley. But there is one book that is moving right along, and that is Mosaic number 2. So Mosaic was a really cool introductory piece. I really like what they were doing with the character, and the fact that he was a really kind of poor person, not necessarily monetarily because he's a superstar NBA player, but the fact that he didn't really have a good sense of morality. He was very much egotistical and egocentric, and he hasn't changed any of those characteristics yet. So he's taking his lessons that he's learned in his life and applying them to his new use of his powers and how those things kind of impact all the decisions that he makes. And he forgets that he's in somebody else's body half the time. He's not himself. He's mixed with somebody else. And he's starting to understand how those individuals work, how he can utilize their skills and their histories. But in the last page, we see how while he can take somebody else's experiences and somebody else's knowledge, there might be other side effects that he's not necessarily used to. So it's definitely something that they're going to have to develop further, and I can't wait to see what they do with that. Mosaic has definitely been a very big surprise for me. I wasn't really expecting it to be as good as it is, but it's one of those things where it's really grown on me as far as the character is concerned, and it's always nice to see a fresh take on something, a new, interesting perspective, and that's what Mosaic gives me every time that I read it. However, something that you wouldn't necessarily consider fresh in any sense of the word when it comes to Spider-Man is clones. So the Clone Conspiracy 2 is kind of an odd duck of an issue. It's really weird because it opens up where we left off. You get a little bit of backstory, a little bit of history that kind of leads into these things. And what you end up with is a situation where continuity gets a little misconstrued, because if you're following the Spider-Gwen title and you're following this title, then there's something that doesn't really make sense a whole heck of a lot, and I'm going to touch on that in my review. But it's one of those things where you just see this whole giant cornucopia of people that have been revived, and it's like staggering the number of people that have come back from the dead. But it's really odd because we saw this character who's evidently universe hopping come back, and he's holding up a newspaper from the future or from a parallel universe, and there's all kinds of random ass stuff going on. It's a little bit more interesting because you can see the temptation, but you also see the kind of like, almost like Spider-Man retches at the idea that all these people are no longer who he knew. Like the people that he knew were dead, and now they're alive. And that was like a really kind of poignant moment, because Spider-Man would you see this as an affront to their memory. And I totally understand and I agree with that perspective. But Clone Conspiracy is still a really weird book, and I'm interested to see where it goes. And hopefully the Spider-Man tie-ins, they can clear things up, particularly next week with Amazing Spider-Man, the new issue. But one of the books that is getting less and less confusing as it goes is Doom Patrol. So Doom Patrol number 3 is pretty rad read. Nick Darrington continues to do a great job with the art, and what we see is that this Doom Patrol is a continuation of the previous iteration. So this new volume definitely has distinct ties to the previous one, which had set up on Oolong Island as their base of operations, and it's really cool to see them referencing back into that and the original characters and how they were portrayed. But ultimately, something has happened to cause people to, separate and become different versions of themselves or be lost in different areas of this whole thing. And it's really the trial of Casey Brink, this new character who's revealed to be Space Case, in a very interesting manner. It's her job to kind of regroup this team so that way Doom Patrol can take on these tasks that are put ahead of them. And this is really portrayed by Danny in a really cool way. I really like it. It's a very interesting concept, and I think Gerard Way did a really good job with it. Overall, Doom Patrol has probably been one of the most enjoyable reads, despite the fact that it's not necessarily one of the most cohesive and coherent kind of books. It's definitely very scattered, but it's scattered in an intentional way. It's meant to kind of make you figure out and filter these things down as things kind of come together. It's like throwing everything into a funnel, and by the time it gets to the end of the funnel, it just makes perfect sense. So I'm really excited about Doom Patrol, and it's definitely a book that I recommend people check out if they haven't had the opportunity yet. Lots of fun. And then we have another book that's not so much fun, but definitely pretty fantastic, and that is Action Comics. So in Action Comics 967, essentially what we get is a brand new arc. And this is based off of the last real reveal and then one from a few issues ago where it's talking about the God Slayer. And what we see is that they're here to hunt down a conqueror, the destroyer of Earth and the conqueror of worlds. And who does that turn out to be? Probably only take one guess, but ultimately it's definitely setting up a possible future iteration of a particular character. I can definitely see how we'd fall back into that kind of trope. We wouldn't necessarily give him a lot of time to prove himself. One of the cool things is that it actually explains why Superman's suit is different, and I really like the fact that John Kent is asking kid questions. Like, but Dad, why didn't you wear the black one? Well, I was in a really tough time at that point in time in my life. And it's like, oh, well, what about the one with the underwear on the outside? It's like, it wasn't actually underwear. It was sewn into it. It was an accent piece. Yeah, but it looked like underwear. So I thought it was really funny. I thought it was really entertaining that Jonathan could be a kid and that you were having these kind of like dad, like these kid questions to Superman. And I thought his explanations were great. I thought it was really entertaining. Not quite as entertaining as Superman, because Superman is the penultimate super dad book, but Action Comics has definitely got a little bit of that flavor in it too. So I really like this one. Not necessarily its best, but definitely a really good start to a new arc. And then there's a book that I continue to get more mixed feelings about, and that is All-Star Batman. So All-Star Batman number 4 is still taking on the Two-Face arc. We see a whole bunch of different things happening, and I don't know what it is, but I feel like the more that I see John Romita's art associated with Batman, like in certain aspects, it's fine. It's like perfect for the scenario. Like there's some of his physical altercations that just look great. When, Batman has his mask off, it's just like, oh, that does not look great. And then there's this one scene in this book, this one panel where Batman is about to throw Two-Face's coin out of a biplane, and it looks like his arm's broken. It's a little mixed. It doesn't necessarily feel as strong as it was. I really liked it a lot better back in issue 2 when everything felt very quick and fast-paced, and it felt like it was a mission. It felt like it was a race against time. And now at this point in time, it doesn't necessarily convey that kind of immediacy, that sense of urgency. It's still a good book, but it's not necessarily one that's, like working its way up to the top of the list. It's pretty good, I guess. So, if you like it, All-Star Batman, it's more of the same from issue 3. But then we have a book that's starting up a brand new arc as well, and that is Flash number 10. So Flash number 10 is very interesting because it brings about a new old villain. So I really like this, and it is the second new artist that they've had in consecutive books. They stopped working with the first artist, so that way you can take a break, catch up on new books. They had a secondary artist for Flash number 9, and then this is Flash number 10, which is another different artist, and it wasn't nearly as jarring when I opened the book up. As far as the storyline, it's pretty standard Flash fare because the Flash is obviously a reliable and thoughtful mentor, but it's interesting when his protege decides that he wants to skip school to become a Teen Titan and really help out and become a vigilante. So it's one of those things where he's got to give Wally West a talking to, which is totally fine, but we do see this character that I believe is the Shade, that was introduced back in like the 1940s and fought against Golden Age and Silver Age Flash. And this is his reintroduction, so it's one of those things where I'm not necessarily sure. I'm gonna have to do some research, but it looks like it's gonna make for a pretty interesting arc. So I can't wait to see where that goes from here. Another really interesting book was Wonder Woman number 10. So Greg Rucka introduced Wonder Woman to the world in this issue, at least in the year 1 story arc. So what that really did was it put her on display for all the world to see, and he did it in a very interesting fashion, because it's set in a more modern interpretation of the world compared to, say, when Wonder Woman was originally introduced. And here she is a wide-eyed, naive warrior goddess that has been bestowed these powers by these ancient gods, and she doesn't necessarily know what they are. She's just going to find out what they are in time. That's what they told her. Her gifts will present themselves when needed. And then ultimately there's this terrorist attack at this local strip mall, and they just start shooting up the place, and she immediately jumps into action. She is like, why did they turn this place into a war zone, and defends all the innocents that she possibly can. And then all of a sudden she's on TV, she's on the internet, people got their smartphones, and they're like, oh my god, Wonder Woman, kind of, they don't know who she is, but she's like this stunning visage that is out there and protecting the innocents. And it he takes a jab at like the media presence, because instead of, focusing on helping the individuals, immediately they want to know who she is, who does her hair, where does she shop. And then Barbara Minerva makes this offhand comment. It's like they're more interested in her bra size than what's going on, in this actual event. Like these people that are hurt, that's what they care about more. Who she is, why she looks so good, those kind of things. I'm really interested to see where the year 1 storyline really ends. It's been going on for like 5 issues right now, and it doesn't really show any signs of really concluding at any point in time. So this could be one that goes on for a little while until it actually meets up with the other storyline and they kind of form into one. So I'm really interested to see where this one goes. Definitely a really cool introduction to the new world for Wonder Woman, at least in the retelling of her origin story. But then we do have another book that is just hitting its stride, and that is Detective Comics 944. So in Detective Comics 944, we see the continuation of the Victim Syndicate arc, and we find out that every single person here that is in this group was a victim of an attempt on Batman's life by one of his villains. One guy was poisoned by the first iteration of Joker gas. There's a whole bunch of reasons why these people don't like Batman, don't like vigilantes, and want to see him unmasked and no longer doing anything to save, quote unquote, save the citizens of Gotham, because there's so many people that are unintended consequences. They're collateral damage in this whole war on crime that Bruce Wayne's been waging for a long time. The most interesting thing, you've got Mr. Fox and the whole Batwing thing. That's pretty cool. You see how, I wouldn't necessarily say disrespectful he is of the Belfry, but how kind of flippant he is regarding those things, because he doesn't necessarily have the whole story. He doesn't have that deep relationship. The most interesting part of this book is, well, at least to me, the origin of this main character, this main person that's leading the victim syndicate, the first victim. So that makes me want to dive into like super old Batman stories and see who the first person to be collateral damage in a Batman story was, and try and uncover that person's identity, what they are, where they're going in those respects. So I am more than on board for Detective Comics. It was a book that I didn't really anticipate picking up a lot, but it is definitely one of my must-reads every time that it comes out. This is just more of the same. But now that we're wrapping up ongoing titles, let's talk about new number ones. And the first one is Violent Love number 1. So Violent Love number 1 was something that I thought was going to be pretty interesting simply because it's a crime romance kind of book. It's really in the same vein as Bonnie and Clyde, Natural Born Killers, True Romance, and various versions of those things. What we're going to see is that it's a little bit less psychotic, at least to start. This is one that it seems like it was something before it became a comic book. Like maybe it was a screenplay, maybe it was a book, maybe it was some sort of treatment or adaptation, but it just feels like it wasn't necessarily originally designed to be a comic book in its whole formatting and its structure. Definitely one of those situations where it's like, oh, here's your opening scene, and now this kid that doesn't really want to be here rolls up, and then she sees this thing, and like, tell me a story. And I wouldn't necessarily say it's contrived, but it definitely feels like a very familiar plot pacing and a very familiar opening, but it's not necessarily designed to be the first issue of a comic book, which is probably why it's a little bit bigger, so that way they can get into a little bit more hearty storytelling. You know, it just needs that extra time in order to kind of get you hooked. But it's something that you guys might enjoy a little bit more. I don't really know, but hit me up in the comments down below and let me know what you guys thought. But I definitely enjoyed the next number 1, and that is Mother Panic number 1. So Mother Panic is a very interesting book from Jody Houser, and this is the young animal interpretation of Batman and Gotham and this whole scape that's going along with there. So we have Violet, who's a socialite. She was originally, a child that was raised by her dad. Her mom was kind of going through dementia or delusional aspects. She wasn't really all there. She wasn't really all together. And for reasons that we don't know yet, she was not necessarily raised in a common way. They didn't really give a whole lot of a backstory right now, but that's probably going to be fleshed out in the next issue. But we do get a little bit more of that at the back half when you get the character bio section, which is really nice for all the young animal books. Mother Panic is really her journey back from wherever she was, particularly rehab in this case, or at least that's the story that they're telling in the media. And she comes in with these goals, this intent, and this intent is to take down people that are in her same social circle, people that are unfit. And we don't necessarily know if this is kind of some sort of benevolent mission or if it's just vengeful, spiteful, hateful. She is not a likable character, and that's one of the interesting things about a book like this. She's definitely not a good person. She doesn't feel like a good person. She doesn't feel like she's doing these things out of a right reason. She doesn't have some sort of moral compass that is pointing her true north. She definitely just feels like somebody that's, she is dishing out her own brand of justice for her own reasons, and we're going to have to read more in order to find out what those are. It's a really strong issue. It has a little cameo from Batman, which is always cool because she's operating in Gotham. How is she not going to run into bad people in Gotham? How is she not going to run into villains in Gotham? It's one of those very cool things where I'm interested to see where this goes and how it interacts with the main DC universe, and I can't wait to see more. It's very cool, highly recommended book. But then we have to get into another new character introduction that's really highly recommended, and that is Invincible Iron Man number 1. So, Riri Williams, she's super cool. And the reason that I like Riri Williams, I like this character, I like this portrayal of this character, is because she is clearly out of her element. She doesn't know what she's doing. She doesn't have a mentor. She doesn't have somebody that can guide her. And that's going to be the heart and soul of the story, is her progression into a hero that she feels like she needs to be. We get some character backstory, and to be honest with you, it's an all-too-real situation in Chicago, but it's one of those very common aspects of a hero's journey. There's a tragedy that befalls her and her family, and she has to she's got this drive now to use her knowledge and her powers for good in order to kind of complete something in herself. And what that does is it really gives her a very familiar character arc, but it's much more about how she develops as a person and where those things go from there. I mean, I don't know who this Anna Max or whatever her name is character is. She's a mutant. She can summon beasts from her DNA, and that's a really odd introduction, and it was really cool because you got to see how Riri Williams as her character, the as yet unnamed character, really works in her own technology. You see how advanced Tony Stark's armor was compared to where she's at right now. It's definitely more of a root of Iron Man situation than just a transitional Iron Man. This is somebody that's going to have to learn the ropes, refine their technology, get up to snuff, and then kind of become the person that they need to be. And I think that that's going to be a really cool journey to watch over the next few issues, possibly through like the next year or so. Definitely something to keep your eyes on. If you haven't had a chance to read Invincible Iron Man #1 with Riri Williams, definitely go take a look at it. It's a whole lot of fun for a book, and I'm really excited about where it's going. There's a whole lot of potential in this character, and I was really glad to see how it was brought about on the page. But then we need to talk about the book that I waited to the end to read, and that is Amazing Spider-Man Renew Your Vows #1. So, it felt weird. You know, it felt really weird. Like, I mean, I wanted to go into this and I wanted to love this book. I wanted to be such a big fan of this book. I was like ready to put on candles. I was going to put on some Marvin Gaye, some Barry White, and I was just going to sit down and I was going to love this book. And you know what? I do. I love it. I really enjoy it. But I do it for a different reason. It's not like, oh, this is the Spider-Man that I've always been waiting for. It's not that. Because I've been reading Dan Slott's Spider-Man, and overall, it's not bad. It's just he feels weird. He feels a little bit more out of character. And this just falls right into character. This is just uncanny valley kind of weird. It's like when you're seeing CG graphics and they're so close to human, but they're not quite. I'm like, is this the Spider-Man that I've really been looking for? And you just feel like it's so close. It is so close. And the only thing that really kind of keeps me from being like full on 11 out of 10 on this book is the fact that it feels a little bit short. It feels like it's kind of stuffing a little bit too much into the first issue. There's a really great little 6-parter that, you know, the Day of Spider-Dad, and that was really fun. I mean, there's so much good in this book. There's so much good in the book. Ryan Stegman crushes the art style. It is just out of this world amazing, and it's just one of those things where you're like, wait, you can't end it there. It's just like, I just need a little bit more. Just give me a little bit more. Just give me a touch. Give me a little bit of that fix. And I just need that. And it's one of those things where there's definitely like little pot shots taken at Dan Slott's Spider-Man, or at least a portrayal of Spider-Man currently. It's like, yeah, of course, why wouldn't I be a photographer? You know, I got to spend time with my family, and it's, you know, allows me to have more fun. I mean, what is Spider-Man if he's not fun? And that's definitely a shot at who Spider-Man is. Like, how fun is Spider-Man in a lab? And it's just like, well, Spider-Man's not very fun in a lab. But the humor is on point. The characterization of Peter Parker and Spider-Man is definitely a throwback to, you know, pre-Civil War type Spider-Man. We're talking like J. Michael Straczynski. They're still together before One More Day, before Brand New Day. You know, possibly even back into like the 400s, you know, between 400 and 500. There's a much different character in there, and that's probably one of the most eerie things about it, because you're like, this is something that I knew and I loved so much. How do I feel about it now? And it's going to be that eye-opening kind of experience. But I have to say, Jerry Conway, Ryan Stegman, they crush this. This is easily one of my most favorite books of the week. I can't recommend it enough because I want people to support this kind of Spider-Man so that way we can see more of it. But I want us to see a happy medium between Dan Slott's Spider-Man and, you know, an evolution of Jerry Conway's Spider-Man, so that way it's like, okay, so he can be successful, but he can also be married, he can have a kid, he can be responsible. The fact that he's got to like make a list to try and get the groceries, and it's just like, okay, so I gotta get this, I gotta get this, I gotta get this, I gotta get this. Carrots or cabbage. Is it cabbage? So I was like, I really need to make a list. And it's just, that is classic Spider-Man. That is the Spider-Man that everybody knows and loves. And I can't wait to see more of it. Highly recommend it. Definitely go grab it if you haven't had a chance. But you probably already have it already. Go read it right now. So those are all the books that I picked up this week and what I thought about them. But I want to know what you guys thought too. So hit me up in the comments down below and we can have that conversation. I can't wait. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe right there to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic movies, comic book TV shows, and games, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.